There are 10 things in your life quietly weakening you, not in obvious ways, not loudly, but slowly, consistently. Small habits, certain people, reactions you repeat without thinking. They don't look like problems, but they are. They are leaks. You keep trying to become stronger. You add more discipline, more effort, more goals, but something still feels off. Because what you build doesn't stay. It slips away. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Power is not lost all at once. It is drained in small, unnoticed ways through things you tolerate, things you ignore, things you never question. And the more you keep them, the weaker your presence becomes. That is why some people never grow, no matter how hard they try. Not because they lack effort, but because they never remove what is quietly holding them back. Power doesn't only come from what you add. It comes from what you are willing to quietly eliminate. The first thing that drains your power is over-explaining. Power does not disappear suddenly. It fades. Quietly. There is no single moment where a person becomes weak. No clear turning point. Instead, it happens through small things. Things that feel harmless. Saying yes when it should have been no. Explaining too much. Seeking approval in places where it was never needed. None of these feel like a loss of power. But they are. Each time it happens, something small is given away. A little control, a little presence, a little clarity. And because the loss is small, it goes unnoticed. Days pass, then weeks, and slowly a pattern begins to form. A person starts to feel less certain, less grounded, less in control of their own direction. But they don't know why. Because nothing obvious is wrong. Everything looks normal from the outside. This is how power leaves. Not through failure, but through quiet permission. Permission given to distractions, to unnecessary conversations, to habits that drain more than they give. Machiavelli observed this in leaders and rulers. Those who lost control rarely did so overnight. They weakened gradually, by allowing small things to slide, by ignoring subtle shifts, by underestimating what seemed unimportant. And over time, those small things became patterns. And those patterns became weak. The most dangerous part is this: when power fades slowly, it feels natural. It feels like life. So nothing is questioned. Nothing is removed. And the leaks continue. Until one day, a person realizes something is missing. Not skill, no effort, but presence. The kind of presence that once felt strong, but now feels distant. And it didn't disappear. It was given away, quietly. The second thing that drains your power is approval. No one chooses weakness. It forms, quietly, over time. Long before a person notices it. It begins in small moments. Moments where approval feels important. Where fitting in feels necessary. Where being accepted feels safer than being different. So adjustments are made. A person learns when to stay quiet, when to agree, when to soften themselves to avoid discomfort. At first, it feels natural, even helpful, because it brings connection. It avoids conflict. It keeps things smooth. But something else is happening underneath. Each adjustment teaches a quiet lesson. That acceptance matters more than authenticity. That comfort matters more than clarity. And slowly, a pattern begins to build. A person starts shaping themselves around others, around expectations, around reactions. Not fully, but enough. Enough to create small compromises. Machiavelli understood that people are deeply influenced by their environment, not just by power, but by the need to feel safe within a group. And safety often comes with a cost. The cost of holding back, the cost of adapting too much, the cost of losing parts of oneself in exchange for belonging. These patterns don't feel like weakness. They feel like normal behavior. Everyone does it. Everyone adjusts. But over time, these small adjustments begin to stack. And what once felt like flexibility starts becoming a dependency. A person begins to rely on approval, on validation, on external signals to feel stable. And without realizing it, control begins to shift away from the self and into the hands of others. This is where weakness truly begins. Not in failure, but in quiet dependence. In the slow habit of giving others the power to shape how you think, feel, and act. And because it feels normal, it is rarely questioned. The third thing you should avoid to become powerful is validation. The mind protects what feels familiar, even if it is weakening you. This is where the quiet confusion begins. A person can see their patterns and still continue them, not because they are unaware, but because something deeper is holding them in place. Psychology explains this gently. The need for approval is not just a habit. It is a survival response. At some point, acceptance became linked to safety. Being liked meant being included. Being included meant being secure. So the mind learned something important. Do what keeps you accepted. Avoid what risks rejection. Over time, this becomes automatic. A person explains too much to avoid misunderstanding, agrees too quickly to avoid conflict, stays connected even when it drains them. None of this feels like weakness. It feels like protection. Machiavelli observed similar patterns in human behavior. He understood that people are guided more by emotion than logic, more by fear than clarity. And the fear of losing connection can quietly control decisions, even when those decisions reduce power. This is why certain behaviors are so difficult to remove. They are not just actions, they are emotional habits, built over years, reinforced through experience. Each time a person receives approval, the pattern strengthens. Each time conflict is avoided, the pattern deepens. And slowly, the behavior becomes identity. This is just how I am. But beneath that belief is conditioning. The mind is trying to keep things stable, predictable, safe, even if that safety comes at the cost of strength. This is the paradox. What feels safe can also be what limits you. And until this is understood, the patterns continue, not because they are needed, but because they feel familiar. The fourth one is comfort. Awareness changes something, but it does not change everything. A person can recognize what is draining them and still hold on to it. This is where resistance begins. Not loud, not obvious, but strong. There is a strange comfort in familiar patterns, even the ones that weaken you, because they are known, predictable, safe in a quiet way. Letting go feels different. It feels uncertain. A person may notice they explain too much, but stopping feels uncomfortable. Silence feels risky. What if they misunderstand? What if something goes wrong? So the pattern continues, not because it is right, but because it feels easier than change. The same happens with approval. A person may realize they seek validation, but removing that need feels empty. There is no feedback, no reassurance, just space. And space can feel unsettling. Machiavelli understood that people resist change, even when it benefits them. Not because they are unaware, but because change disturbs what feels stable. The mind prefers the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting. So it creates quiet excuses. This is not a big deal. This is just how things are. I'll change it later. These thoughts feel harmless, but they delay removal. They protect the pattern, and the longer a pattern stays, the harder it becomes to let go. This is the hidden struggle, not between right and wrong, but between comfort and clarity, between what feels safe and what actually strengthens you. And most people choose comfort, not consciously, but quietly, without realizing that every moment of avoidance keeps the leak open, and power continues to slip away. You must quietly quit awareness, because clarity does not arrive with noise. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed. There is a moment when a person starts seeing things differently. The same habits, the same people, the same patterns. But now, something feels clear. What once felt normal no longer feels right. There is no anger in this realization, no urgency, just awareness, a calm understanding that something is draining energy, and it doesn't need to stay. This is where change truly begins, not in action, but in seeing. Machiavelli understood that awareness is a form of power, because once something is seen clearly, it cannot return to being invisible. The illusion breaks, and with it, the attachment begins to weaken. A person no longer feels the need to explain everything, no longer feels the need to seek approval in the same way, not because they forced themselves to stop, but because they understand. And understanding creates distance from habits, from reactions, from patterns that once felt automatic. This distance is quiet, invisible to others. Nothing dramatic changes on the outside. Conversations still happen. Life continues. But something inside has shifted. The need to hold on to certain things begins to fade. And with that, removal becomes easier. Not as effort, but as a natural response. Machiavelli's philosophy reflects this subtlety. True change does not require announcement. Because the announcement invites attention, and attention invites interference. So, the process remains silent. Things are removed without explanation. Patterns are reduced without discussion. And no one notices. Not immediately. Because real change does not look dramatic. It looks ordinary. Until one day, the difference becomes clear. And by then, it is already complete. Unnecessary attachment should everyone who wants to become powerful. There is a different kind of strength, the kind that does not come from doing more, but from holding less. At first, this feels unfamiliar, because most people are taught to build power by adding more habits, more discipline, more control. But something changes when unnecessary weight is removed. Things become lighter, clearer, more stable. The mind is not pulled in different directions. Energy is not scattered across distractions. Attention is no longer divided, and slowly, something begins to return. Presence, the kind that does not need to prove itself. Machiavelli understood that control is not only about action, it is also about restraint. Knowing what not to engage with, what not to respond to, what not to carry. This creates a quiet form of authority, because when a person is no longer reacting to everything, they become harder to influence, harder to disturb, harder to control. Letting go is often misunderstood. It is not a loss. It is refined. The removal of what weakens structure. So what remains becomes stronger. A person who stops over-explaining begins to feel more grounded. A person who no longer seeks approval begins to feel more stable. Not because they gained anything new, but because they stopped giving something away. And this shift is subtle, invisible from the outside, but deeply felt within. There is less noise, less urgency, less need to react. And in that quiet space, control returns. Not forced, not dramatic, just steady. This is where power begins to feel different. Not heavy, not intense, but calm. Because when nothing is leaking, everything stays. And what stays begins to grow. The last thing you should avoid if you want to become powerful is noise. Silence has a different kind of weight. It does not demand attention. It does not explain itself, but it changes things. There is a version of strength that does not speak loudly. It does not need to be proven. It does not need to be seen. It simply exists. Machiavelli understood this deeply. Power that is constantly displayed becomes exposed, and what is exposed can be challenged. But what remains quiet is harder to measure, harder to predict, harder to control. This is why true change rarely looks dramatic. There are no announcements, no visible transformations, just small, silent shifts. A person speaks less, but with more intention, responds less, but with more control, engage less, but with more clarity. From the outside, nothing seems different, but something is. The noise is gone. The need to explain is gone. The need to prove is gone. The need to be understood by everyone fades. And in that silence, something stronger takes its place. Presence, a calm, steady form of power that does not depend on recognition. It is not built for attention. It is not shaped by approval. It is self-contained. And because of that, it is difficult to disturb. People may not immediately notice it, but they feel it in the way a person carries themselves, in the way they respond or choose not to respond. There is less reaction, more control, less noise, more weight. This is the final shift, where power no longer needs to grow loudly. It simply becomes quiet, stable, unseen. And perhaps this is what Machiavelli understood all along. The strongest form of power is the one that no one sees coming.